U.S. President George W. Bush declared a war on terror in 2001. 70 nations took part in the subsequent war in Afghanistan, including all NATO countries, and Russia. A few days after the attacks, Putin, speaking German, addressed the German parliament in Berlin.
Putin was one of the very first to express his condolences and a willingness to help after 9/11. Relations were still stable back then.
Wenn wir aber, geehrte Damen und Herren, angefangen haben, von der Sicherheit zu sprechen, müssen wir uns zuerst klar machen, von wem wir uns schützen müssen und wie. In diesem Zusammenhang kann ich die Katastrophe, die am 11. September in den Vereinigten Staaten geschehen ist, nicht unerwähnt lassen. Menschen in der ganzen Welt fragen sich, wie es dazu kommen konnte und wer daran schuldig ist. Ich finde, dass wir alle daran schuldig sind. Vor allem wir, die Politiker. Wir leben weiterhin im alten Wertesystem. Wir sprechen von einer Partnerschaft. Nur in Wirklichkeit haben wir immer noch nie gelernt, einander zu vertrauen.
Putin supported NATO in Afghanistan in the fight against al-Qaeda. Some of NATO's logistics were routed via Russia. At the time, Putin even considered the prospect of Russia joining NATO. Both Russia and NATO member states benefited from the cooperation, economically and politically.
There
was a very good cooperation between the West and Russia, especially in the early 2000s. The best example is probably the transportation options that Russia offered NATO during the war in Afghanistan. The so-called Northern Transport Corridor worked well for several years. It proved to be very effective.
From 2002 onwards, representatives of Russia and NATO met regularly in the NATO-Russia Council. The mood among leaders was playful and upbeat.
Поэтому предлагаю с этого момента штаб-квартиру надо переименовать в Дом Советов. Думаю, что это неплохое предложение.
Things started to go downhill with the U.S. decision to intervene in Iraq, if not before then. Because Moscow, of course, had the feeling that a red line had been crossed. If the Americans were going to start that kind of war, with thousands of tanks and soldiers, and as it turned out, based on false information, then where would it end?
It was the beginning of the end of good relations between Russia and the West. Russia, like China and France, voted against the invasion of Iraq at the UN Security Council. The U.S. invaded anyway, without a UN mandate. In 2007, 4 years after the U.S. invaded Iraq with its coalition of the willing, Putin spoke at the Munich Security Conference. He took the United States and its allies to task over their policies.
Формат конференции дает мне возможность избежать излишнего политеса и необходимости говорить округлыми, приятными, но пустыми дипломатическими штампами.
Для Запада
In the West, the fact that contact was maintained between Moscow and Brussels was very often seen as some kind of favor from NATO towards Russia. The Council was almost exclusively considered a mechanism for exchanging information, but one which had no serious decision-making functions. And of course, those two approaches were bound to clash sooner or later.
Эти два подхода рано или поздно должны были столкнуться.
Мы видим все большее пренебрежение основополагающими принципами международного права. Больше того, отдельные нормы, да по сути чуть ли не вся система права одного государства, прежде всего, конечно, Соединенных Штатов, перешагнула свои национальные границы и, по сути, во всех сферах, и в экономике, и в политике, и в гуманитарной сфере навязывается другим государствам. Ну, кому это понравится? Кому это понравится?